This is a daughter podcast where dads come to talk, think, and thrive with your hosts, Oscar and Blandon. Our mission is to cultivate a community of strong, mindful, and present fathers.
We want to curate honest conversations with all men, but especially those who have the honor of raising daughters.
Hey everyone, Oscar here at the Daughter Podcast with Blandon on the other side. How you doing, Blandon?
Oh, I am a lot jet lagged, but it's okay. I was doing some traveling for work, traveled out the country, and coming back, I traveled back to the past. No anymore. I was in the future and now I'm in the past, so I'm all over the place, but I'm adjusting. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm getting through work. As our listeners know, we've been traveling for a while. You just got back from your travels. Being out for a few weeks brings in a whole new bucket of things to do at work and at home and all different things. So trying to catch back up and get my head out of water, if you will. With that, though, is brought a lot of repair mode, and we'll talk about that today. Repair, forgiveness, reconciliation, that kind of thing. When it comes to parenting these girls or fathering these girls, I have found myself in repair mode. Oh man, I think since like Saturday night, I'm not like breaking too many things. I don't think we get to a point where maybe work, it may be things around, maybe finances, maybe whatever you have, but they start to chip at your ability to take on things, right? And I think we talked about this a little bit in our prior podcast. We're give and give at work because that's what's expected of us, right? Your performance report relies on you giving all the things at work, and then we should, right? We're supposed to work hard, but then we get home and we have just a little bit left for the people who really matter. And yeah, I've felt like I've been in repair mode for a couple of days now. We talked about the temperature of the house and how I can change that and trying to repair with the girls. And so it's been a little bit difficult this week.
I can totally relate to that. And I think because we have our own set of words about this, we struggled this week, like trying to name this podcast, like giving it a name, but we were coming from the same place as what we found. Like you were calling repair, I was talking about forgiveness, and I think repairing and forgiveness lead us to this like reconciliation point, but we'll get there later. But yeah, I totally understand, like modeling forgiveness, working in maintaining and repairing relationships, especially as a busy father and especially with girls. I think it's super important because that father-daughter dynamic is, as we've said, is unique into itself. And I think once you begin to damage that, it starts to affect our girls in their other relationships because we're that primary relationship. We're that relationship that shows them and teaches them love from a man, love from authority, how they should be loved and respected and valued. And we have to be primary seekers of forgiveness from them, right? We have to be the primary repairs. They can't at 12, 8, 3 or 7 and 5 come to us and try to repair a relationship. We have to be the ones who go to them and model that forgiveness and what reconciliation looks like and what really being in repair mode looks like. And sometimes it can be difficult, like when we're traveling or when we're tired or we're stressed or any number of things that pull at us during the day. So I totally get that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we here in our household, I try to keep an even keel throughout the day, especially around the girls, because I want to model that in them. But I've read about this. I've read several different authors, as you talked about, right? I'm not trying to get zeroed into one. The biggest thing I think is you can't reconcile until you start first. I think, to your point, I think you have to apologize for things and be ready to repair those things. So we were talking about apologies or forgiveness. before we started the podcast, and sorry can be so hollow, right? Like the word sorry for for moving on, and we talked a little bit about that offline, and one of the reasons why we were having a hard time zeroing in on the name for the podcast, or what we really, not necessarily the name, but really what we were both trying to get at. And one of my girls will do something to the other. Oh, sorry. What are you sorry for? Are you sorry that, that your sister is hurting or what have you? Or are you sorry that you got caught doing it? Or are
Mhm.
you just saying sorry because you know that if you just say sorry, we just can move on? You talked about your
Right.
girls in the last podcast where they can go and rat each other out. And then in a second, they'd be like just playing, like going right back to normal.
Right.
So
Right.
are we actually sorry? Or are you just saying sorry because you know that's the next step before you can just move on and go on to something else? And I don't have hard research for this. I have studied a lot and read. And with my girls, as you mentioned, I want to emulate what they should be treated like, right? And
Yes.
so one thing I've had a hard time with is growing up and how maybe how I was brought up is you just do what you're told. There's no arguing.
Mhm.
There's no conversation around it, especially if it comes to changing the attitude. Oh, how dare you have that attitude? And I guess to further that, there's no. I wouldn't be able to call out like my mother when I was growing up. Oh, you did this. Like it's taboo. It's not happening.
That was unheard
Unheard
of
of.
when we were growing up. You're not calling out
Right.
adults. Even if you felt a way, even if you knew better, that was internalized, right? I'm not calling out my mother, first of all, because she's my mother. And when I was growing up, I'm not afraid to say it. I really truly thought my mother was crazy. She's a completely different person as a grandmother and a completely different person to me now as an adult child. But when I was growing up in that household, it was like she was loving, but I thought she was really crazy. Like everything that she said she would do, I thought she would do. When she was like, "You will be homeless if you disrespect me and or all this other stuff. You talk back." I really thought I was gonna be homeless. I
Right.
thought I was gonna be one of those kids with a little stick and a scarf and a peanut butter jelly sandwich on the side of the street. I did not think she was lying about that. But yeah, so I yeah, that was unheard of to correct
And,
an adult
and,
or
and,
reprimand
and
an
this may be wrong, but I think there's some merit to that as well. Because and I'm not saying the full crazy, like you're gonna be homeless kind of thing. But the fact that you instill, like, you will respect your elders. Like, you don't have to like
right,
people, right? You don't have to.
right.
You don't even have to know people, but everybody deserves a certain amount of respect when you first meet them. And until
Yes.
that until that's gone, then you should be given that. I was raised pretty much similar. I'm pretty sure my mother was nuts as well. At least in the kid eyes that I had, right?
In my head.
Um,
Yeah. In our heads, they were crazy.
Well, there was
Yes, true.
times where if I said something, my mother's not an athlete, but I could have sworn she moved with the speed of a ninja, smacked me in the mouth, and I wouldn't even know where it came from because how there was no way that she was gonna allow me to be disrespectful to any of my aunts or uncles or anything, anybody. And again, maybe the methodology wasn't what we have now, right? But I can tell you, I'd be damned if I'd be disrespecting people, right? And
Yeah.
we'll go from there.
Yeah.
If you wanna get crazy, then we'll get crazy. But you what we start with a certain amount of respect, and I think that's
Yeah.
ingrained at least in me as I grew up, and it sounds like pretty similar you.
Yeah.
So again, may be wrong to say it, but I think there's some merit to that, especially as you see our current society. And when I look at a classroom video of some kid just mouthing off to the teacher, and the only
Yeah.
thing that we can find on the article is that the parent went in guns hot on the teacher. I tell you right
Right.
now, if that was me, if I was ever, in fact, I can tell you right now, every time I got in trouble at school, it
Yeah.
was never what
Yeah.
did they do to you? It was always what did you do?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
and were you respectful? Were you not respectful? Because that was going to depend on the consequence that I had, right?
Right.
So again, I know we're diverting a little bit from our topic, but I think there's a certain amount of necessary teaching that needs to happen within that, right? As we grow our kids to be good people, respecting people.
I agree. I feel like there was a certain level of like reverential fear that I needed to have. It got me here. I had some values instilled in me. It was, like you said, it was a teaching lesson because my mom growing up for me was not a liar. So if she said something, I believed it 100%. There was no questioning it. And yeah, I just think that we've gotten away from that a little bit, like that respect for our elders and adults and, what they say. And sometimes kids should just be seen and not heard in a situation. I think it's too freely that kids jump into adult situations and conversations and think they're contributors and they really shouldn't be. But now I want to try to do that in a respectful way. Like I tell my girls, hey, listen, if daddy is talking to adults, you don't just come butt in. That's rude. And I'm not raising you to be, number one, rude people or rude children, and then rude young ladies, because that's not the type of young lady that I want you to be. Ultimately, I want you to be respectful of people and circumstances and understanding time and place. So I think all of those are teaching lessons and they're important. And sometimes I knew how I felt in that situation. I wanted to be heard by my mother, by my parent, and especially my stepfather was very old school. So he was definitely not trying to negotiate and talk to children. That was out of the norm. And I don't want to negotiate with my children, so to speak, but I do want them to know that they are valued in what they say, and especially girls. I think in a society where a lot of times women feel like they don't have a voice, and so now you have this kind of feminism that says we don't need men, get rid of men altogether, they're the problem. And I want to be a good example for them to know that they always have a voice with me and they can always come and talk to me. However, there needs to be a time and place. And so I think that's a balancing
Well,
act.
and I think it's important to realize that sure we're talking about our children, our girls butting into a conversation, and absolutely it's rude. But you said something that was key, and that is that there's a time and a place to give your input. So many times you will have someone give input that is one not relevant to the conversation. You can put it at the level of like insignificant, like some insignificant conversation, and it was not relevant. Fine, it's almost comical, right? And you've probably had those
Yeah.
people growing up. Or
Yeah.
it can be in a situation where it is significant, and maybe that's not the time to butt in and bring something in that is not helping the situation. But there is, again, merit in teaching your children. There is a time and place for them to bring in input, because you're right. I'm the same way is I didn't have this, but I want my girls to know that they're valued. What you want to bring into the conversation is of value to me, but it may not be needed to bring in right now, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Talked about Bluey, right? There's this episode where the dad says, "How about you just touch my hand if you need to tell me
Right.
something? Don't interrupt, but just touch my hand. That way, I'll know to have a breaking conversation so I can come talk to you." I thought that was really good,
Right.
right? Because
Yeah.
I wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
interrupt, period, when I was growing up, and odds are it was a significant conversation. But maybe there was something in you that every so often, and I've been so guilty of this where my kids will start to bug me, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm talking," and then they were like, "Hey, my baby sister's about to fall off the thing." Oh yeah, okay, thanks for telling me that. That's the time and
Right.
place. You see what I'm saying? Figuring that out. But this whole conversation as we're taking it brings into mind what our topic is, which is that reconciliation ultimately, but
Yeah.
for asking for forgiveness and repairing the relationship. And I say that because, as I mentioned earlier, I've been in repair mode pretty much all weekend. I've been almost just like too short with my girls, where I'm either impatient because I got to do something. I've been super busy. As I mentioned, I just got back from being gone for three ish weeks of just not being here. So that includes
Yeah.
work stuff and home stuff, and not their fault. but it's something where I catch myself on, right? It's like my meter starts to get tapped. They're not doing what I'm asking them to do in the manner that I'm asking them, which is usually just a personal preference, really. Or I'm my brain is busy with something in the moment. And you mentioned multitasking is a myth. 100% for me. Like I'm a one track mind person, right?
1000%.
Yeah. So I'm doing something and they come and they start talking. And again, which is, it's almost comical because I'm not talking to anyone, but when they come in and this, like I said, this last weekend, they'll come and interrupt my thought process or my action of doing whatever. I've come to turn around and be like, I need you to stop right now. Leave me alone for a second. I'm doing this thing. But not in the tone. We talked about tones and we talked about that dad capital. So I felt like I've been diminishing a lot of dad capital this last couple of days. And the thing that I think, as I've learned more and more, that I've taken is that getting to repairing is really important. As much as you and I are trying to be better parents, better fathers for our girls, we're still human, right? And a lot of our background just follows. Like it's not, it doesn't just go away, right? Oh, I'm gonna be a great dad now. I just read this book and I'm gonna be great.
Right, right.
Right? It doesn't just go away. And so part of the repairing for me is one, self analyzing what I just did or what I just said or what I didn't say, or maybe more importantly for me is how I said it. And then
Yeah.
going to them once the emotions are out of the way, including myself, by the way, which was a huge factor for
Yeah.
me this weekend, which was like, I want to go repair this, but I cannot go repair this at this very moment. Because it's so important for me, it's so important to emulate the emotional control. And the thing is, when it happens, it's like the opposite because it's probably not emotionally sound. But I want to, at least in that repair mode, to go in well controlled in my emotions to say, hey, objectively, I was wrong in doing XYZ. This is why I was doing it. Not fair to you. What have you? Like, have that conversation without that emotional lever pulled in any direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's been for me a struggle to do that. But and one thing that sucks that I've done to myself is that I've stopped journaling. When I was journaling, I was able to write that down. Even if I didn't catch it at that moment, as I journaled through that, I was able to say, oh crap, I did these things and I didn't go and repair. And one thing that I've learned so far is that repair can happen whenever. And now, obviously, you want to do it sooner rather than later, but repair can happen whenever. So if I can catch that in my writing, in me telling myself, then I can go back or at least plan to do that the next day. And I like to do that, but I haven't been doing that. And I've caught myself missing those moments where I should have gone in and asked forgiveness and repaired just a little bit because I don't, again, to me, sorries just feel real empty.
They are. Sorry is superficial. Like at best it's superficial. But I think what you hit on is something very important and very vital is being able to name it. To be able to name the place of annoyance or irritation and not just a trigger, quote unquote, but something that we deal with as people and then that we bring into our relationships. We bring into our parenting, we bring into our marriage, we bring into our friendships. Like and they're typically constant things. They're not things that are just a one-off. So it's not just a thing that would just bother you in this situation and not in this other situation. And I really I find for me it's been the same. It's been consistent and it's where I have to do most of my seeking forgiveness from people. And my misunderstandings of them, and then also like maybe I don't know, like a disconnection from them. And a main point where I have to do repair mode is when I feel unappreciated. And then also when I think someone is like complaining unnecessarily. I know it was because I grew up and I just was all about resolutions and finding ways to overcome it and not complain and trying to be grateful for just what I had, not comparing to other people. Being taught in a household, not everybody grows up with this. Not everybody grows up with these same tools. Not everybody is equipped. Don't complain. And so when I hear my girls complain, first of all, and I'm doing as a dad, you're working really hard for your family, you're doing all these things, and then these little people who kind of show this entitlement. Dad, this is too hot, too cold, like this kind of Goldilocks complex. Is you have nothing to complain about. Do you understand? Well, you don't want to put it in that frame of reference, but there are some people who don't have this. They don't even have this. Like you're complaining that your switch is not charged right now. You should have charged it. What are you're complaining your tablet is not charged? And that's where I find most of the time I need to seek forgiveness because I'm like, okay, get over it. Go charge it. Go do it. And then you can see their little faces shrink and crumble. And then you feel like, oh, I've been a jerk unnecessarily because they don't know they're suffering from first world issues. Who in the third world country is complaining about not having a tablet charge, right? But yeah, and then I go to them and I have to admit that, daddy is sorry that he was harsh with you, that I belittled you or invalidated the way you were feeling. That was important to you at that time. And even though it might not have been important to me, I still should have taken the time to listen to you and I could have responded to you better. And I think that's being a dad, going to your daughter, wanting her to understand you and wanting to understand her better. So,
Yeah, and I've tried to stop using the word itself, sorry. When I
yeah,
go and repair, I try to bring up what I did first without even saying
yeah,
forgive me, nothing. Just hey, I realized that I was doing this or I acted like this.
yeah,
I always try to make it a point to remind them my reaction is not your responsibility. My
yes,
emotional reaction is 0% your responsibility. That is how I react to whatever you do is on me, good, bad, or
yeah,
indifferent. So I always try to remind them that they're not responsible for my emotional outburst. They're not responsible for me being upset. They're responsible for things that they're responsible for, not for that.
right,
But I try
yeah,
to remember to remind them that you're not responsible for me. I did get upset, but that's not your responsibility, right? Then we'll talk a little bit through that and I'll tell them why. I'll try to tell them why. Again, once the emotions are out of it. And then I'll say, I apologize. And it
yeah,
doesn't always go that way. Trust me, it does not. It doesn't always go in that manner either because sometimes I feel like I did something not so bad, but just like bad enough where I'm like, I need to apologize now. And
yeah,
sorry first comes out first. But I try not to even use the word sorry anymore because it just gets it in my brain, it gets drowned out. Through my parenting learning, I've learned that I've created this situation every so often where my girls feel like they just have to say sorry about everything. Not everything, but like, oh, sorry about this. Like, why are you apologizing for it? Like, why are you apologizing that the dog did X? Like, the dog is a dog, right? But in that, I've realized like I may have created that an expectations or level of expectation that has done that. And so getting them to understand like, hey, the word sorry means nothing to me without action.
yeah,
And then I try to bring that to
yeah,
myself. Like me apologizing for something means nothing to them unless there's action involved. Because
right,
action, that is the repair. And then as you mentioned, that apology with the repair now would get to reconciliation. Like we are reconciled where yes, I may have slightly damaged our relationship, but we can reconcile that and be back to where we
Yeah.
should be.
And sometimes even better
Right.
than you were. If you seek forgiveness correctly and you're able to repair things, like a lot of times you can be in a better relationship, reconciled than you were, because now you've gone through that hard thing. And I think relationships are things that need to be tested, and especially familiar bonds, because a lot of times, like me and you talk about, like family sometimes feels like an obligation. Like no matter what, I'm always just going to be there, no matter how far you screw up, how far you disrespect me. But in today's society, we know that's not true. Like somebody could move 1,000 miles away and never speak to their sibling again just because the relationship is in a bad space. But I think it's important for our girls to see us model, like you said, that repair, to be reconciled, to be in a better position with them, because now we've gone through this hard thing. I've shown you that through your actions that I'm not going to cross this boundary anymore, and I'm actively not. So
Right.
I think that's important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I in that process, I think it's important to remind your child, maybe an older child, I have a 12-year-old, so to
Yeah.
remind her, like, hey, I'm human too. And those mistakes are fine. Like, just make the mistakes. I don't like making the mistakes with them, but it does hopefully remind them, like, that's a normal thing. Like, mistakes are fine. Just you have to own up to that, and you have to just accept the consequence to that. You mentioned I think you mentioned this is the five A's of reconciliation, or
It's from this book called Peacemaker. And inside of it, it has like the 7 A's of confession. And so this is about seeking forgiveness. One is address everyone involved, which I appreciate, because if you leave someone out of it, like if it's done in public, if it's done in a group of people, this kind of like horrible thing that's been done, you got to address everybody. Second, avoid using words like if, but, and maybe. If I hurt your feelings, but I really meant that, like, just avoid using all those.
or that, hey, I'm sorry that this happened, but if you hadn't done this, like, I'm
Right.
so guilty.
That, that's like striking out the whole
100%.
admit it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So then it's admit specifically what you've done wrong. So that's really what I like to show my girls, teach them, because you're right. They're so quick to say sorry. And I'm like, don't say sorry, but say what you did. Or what are you sorry for? Admit what you did to your sister. Or in my case, I have to admit what I did to you. I know I hurt your feelings. How did I hurt your feelings? I yelled at you. I ignored you. I whatever. But I have to admit specifically what I did. And I think that's a part in forgiveness where people don't do. They want to give a vague apology, and then nothing actually gets worked on. And the other person is unsure about what you're apologizing for. So if you admit it specifically, then you can move
Well,
on.
we talked a little bit about that, right? What are you sorry for? Are you sorry? Are you sorry for how the other person felt? Are you sorry for getting caught?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry because I got caught. Like, I'm telling you, because I've been there. I'm not really sorry for what I
Yeah.
did, but I definitely am sorry for what's about to come because I got caught. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
So yeah, you're absolutely
Right.
right. Like, actually naming or voicing what you're actually sorry for, and that's hard. I've tried to do that with my girls, and sometimes they don't know what they're actually sorry for. They just want to be sorry.
Right. They just want to get over it. Like you said, I just want to move
Yep.
on. But we have to teach them that you can't just brush things under the rug, because once you do, you just have a big pile of mess that you're stepping on. That's how I think there are deep cracks in people's primary relationships, because all their life, all they've done is brush things under the rug.
Right.
They've never dealt with anything. And that is what, if I'm thankful to my mom for one thing, which I'm thankful for her for many things, but if there's one thing that she did right, was we talked about conflict resolution. Like we sat at the dinner table and we were like, we were going to talk it out. Like, we weren't getting up from the table until we had sufficiently talked through issues and that we had admitted and acknowledged what we had done to each other, because she didn't want us to go back to our corners and still ruminate on the situation. So it was like, after we get up from here, we're not talking about this anymore because we've settled it. And it shaped me into who I am. But then I realized most people didn't grow up like that. Most people weren't talking through issues fully. They would just say, "Yeah, I'm fine. Yeah, it's totally fine. Going on," and then they still have it in the back of their head. Oh, this person did this to me, and I'm never going to forget that, because there was no resolve to it.
Well, especially things that are repeat offenses,
Right.
right? Because I remind my oldest, hey, the first time you do something, probably a mistake. Second time, it's a choice. Like, you do
Yeah.
the exact same
Yeah.
thing again. That's a choice. That's not a mistake. And now you have to apologize for choosing to do something that you shouldn't have done. Right.
Yeah. And the third and fourth time you do it, that becomes a trait.
Yeah.
Right. That's who you
Yeah.
are. So first, addressed. Second, avoid using words like if, but, and maybe. Three, admit specifically what you've done. Four, acknowledge the hurt that the other person is feeling, which I think is huge. Five, accept the consequence, which is really difficult for a lot of people, because I think the consequence can be, I no longer want to be in a relationship with you anymore. The consequence could be, I need time to think about this. The consequence could be you going to jail because you violated me in some kind of way, but you have to be willing to accept the consequence. Next is alter your behavior. And then finally, this last one is ask for forgiveness. So those are the 7 A's of confession.
And sum all seven into just ownership. You're owning
Yeah.
your actions, the consequence, and then the plan to change that. That's 100%. You're owning that. And here in our house, we talk about ownership all the time. Hey, make a decision,
Yeah.
own it, own the good, own the bad,
Yep.
at all times. And
Yep.
when this last couple of days where I've been repairing, I have to be very careful of the buts and ifs, right? Like I'm telling you, because they're easy. They're an easy cop out. Of even after I tell my kids, you're not responsible for my reaction, like the buts and if easily come into play. But if you had just done your chores, I wouldn't be upset about this. Like it
Right.
nullifies everything that I'm trying to do. I completely understand that. And so we've talked about purposefulness in our episodes. And this is one instance where repairing has to be purposeful. I have to sit there and I will talk to my wife and be like, this is what I'm upset about. Am I too far left? Am I too far right? Tell me where I'm at before I go and repair. Or I'll say, or I'm gonna say sorry, but I'm only gonna say sorry for the things that I own. Hey, sorry for my overreaction. Hey, sorry for ignoring you because I did that. Even though I'm telling you, like Dave right now, just I have gone in to apologize in my brain thinking, but if you just didn't do this, and it's so hard for me not to say that because that's again, some people may not like that, but it's an easy cop out because yes, technically, the chain of events is if this was done the way I asked, then this wouldn't have happened.
Cause and effect.
Right.
There was causality. Yeah. I just didn't behave like this without a cause. Yes. So I need you to know the cause.
Well, in part of that ownership is funny because you almost want them to take ownership for them. And so you want to force it on them, right? Like, I need you to take ownership for this. But it doesn't work that way. You have to just emulate that and show like, hey, I'm not taking ownership from what you did. I'm taking ownership for what I did. In that, I hope that in your thought process, you say, or you think about the things that you did, right? But that's hard because I want to just point out the things that they did. because I want to
Right.
take ownership of it. But I think in conversation, that's good. In a calm, non-problematic conversation, that's probably a good thing to talk through. But it is not, at least I found, it is not a good thing to talk through during a repairing session where I'm trying to repair how I reacted to my girl about XY. If I bring that into that repair, then the repair can completely gets nullified. And now I have no way of really building back that capital. And ultimately, by repairing, my intent is to build back my capital, or at least mend the break in the piggy bank where I put my capital in. At least mend it. Maybe I didn't build it back, but if I can mend it, then I can start building it back tomorrow and the next day and the next day. But that's my intent. So I've learned now that ifs and buts and reminding them or hoping that or actually forcing them to take responsibility is so hard because it's hard. It's hard to do that without bringing in the ifs and buts. Because I can be like, I own all this, but you should probably own this other thing, right? And then that all goes away.
In that list, I think the biggest thing for me a lot of times is like acknowledging how that other person feels, like the acknowledgement of the feelings. And it's not hard for, I guess, me to acknowledge that they felt that way. I think for people, for me to actually forgive someone else, a lot of times they don't acknowledge how I was feeling in that situation. And so it becomes difficult for me to forgive if there's not an acknowledgement of how I felt. So I truly try to bring that into the conversation with the girls. You know, I know this hurt your feelings. I know this made you feel bad. Daddy is not trying to make you feel small or like you don't matter. I want you to know that you do matter. You matter very much, and your feelings matter very much. I'm trying to remind them of that because I know so often when people hurt your feelings or betray you or show themselves to be disloyal and then they don't acknowledge it, it makes it 10 times harder to get into that repair mode and to get to reconciliation because you don't even value how I feel about this. Why would I want you around? Why do I want you in my space? Why do I want you in my life? And I don't want my girls to ever feel like that, nor to ever feel like he doesn't value how I feel or how I see the world. So I think that's the one that I have the biggest struggles with.
If you have the struggle, I'm way behind because one thing that I I don't, for me personally, I don't need you to acknowledge my feelings at all. I
Mm, okay.
If you acknowledge that there's a mistake and that we have a problem, we have a direction to fix it. That's all I need. My feelings are mine, and I can feel however I might feel, but that's my choice. Like I choose either to not feel anything, like okay, cool, we fix it. All right, cool, I'm moving on, or I can choose to feel annoyed or what have you. And I know that's not everybody's take on that, but because so that's me personally, but because of my personal view of feelings and how come and go, like feeling come
They do.
right, and I can feel better about you tomorrow when I realize that you did realize what you did and we did fix it, and I can be just fine, right?
Yeah.
As long as there wasn't a big break in whatever that relationship was, feelings for me don't really come into play with that, and that's okay for me. But as a girl dad, that is not necessarily the case for my girls. And so when you say you have a hard time, I can tell you right now, it's probably one of the biggest barriers for me to say, hey, I'm sorry for the things I did, but you can feel however you want about it at this point. Right.
Hmm. Hmm.
And although I believe that's true, because that the feelings are within you specifically, like when my middle kid will come over and be like, my sister said this and my feelings got hurt. I'll say, hey, your feelings are yours. So You can have them hurt, or you can just not have them hurt. They're yours. Translate the way I want to say it, because to me, feelings are power. If I let you change my feeling, then I've given you this power that I don't want to give you, right? So I try to relay that to my girls, but that doesn't always translate to them the way that it comes across in my brain. Like those movies where you're like, I said something and it sounded so much better than when I actually said it. But I say it all the time. I'm like, hey, your feelings are yours. You got some friend at school that wants to be a jerk? Cool. Let them be a jerk. Their true colors, great. That's fine. Don't give them your feelings. Right. And maybe that's more and more, that's been a coping mechanism for me. You don't own this, right? You don't own the feelings. You can do whatever you want, but that's not, you don't own that, right? And then if further got solidified, like I listened to this podcast, I think it was a Jocko podcast, and they had this Vietnam veteran, right? And he was stuck in this cell with a bunch of other folks, the Hilton. So he was a prisoner of war, stuck with, I want to say it was 6 other prisoners in a tiny little cell for several years. I don't even put a number because I can't remember the exact time frame. But the guy, he's being interviewed, and it's like, when I got annoyed at another prisoner of war with me, I come to realize like that only affected me, right? So my feeling of annoyance only affected me. It didn't affect anybody else. So we decided you wouldn't allow that to affect him. And so that's where I come with my feelings. Like, as long as we can talk through things, there's a repair plan. If it wasn't malicious, we go this way. Cool. If it was malicious, we go this way. And we're not cool. And that's good. But I'm not going to waste any feelings about that. Right? But
You almost said it like it was a dirty word, like
because
feeling.
We talked a little about this, like anger. Like being angry is exhausting.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
That's a feeling.
Absolutely.
Anger is a feeling.
But if you suppress that feeling, though, if you don't acknowledge that feeling, it shows up in unexpected ways.
I agree.
And that's what I'm saying. To not be emotive or express those feelings can be just as detrimental to you as being controlled and led by them. I think it really is a balancing act. I think it really is like you use your feelings as a gauge and not a guide. I can't be guided by my feelings, like you said. Like I completely agree with that. But I use it as a gauge for myself to say, why am I hurt? But I think if someone does something that violates you and that may be egregious to you, I think it's okay to have a feeling about that and for that person to acknowledge that I'm disappointed in the way you responded in this time. Disappointment is a feeling.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that I am ruled by disappointment. It just means I felt disappointed in that moment.
And that brings us full circle, because how often will we present the feelings at work as opposed to at home?
Right.
Right. And a frustrating feeling may not present at work, but then it'll be presented at home.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't always, I want to make sure to put this out there. I don't want to use this as a cop out, because that's not always the case. Sometimes we just get too comfortable at home. We just feel like we could just do whatever the hell we want at home. While at work, we got to put up this front. But so I don't want to use it as a cop out, but it is something that we should explore, because it is one of those things. It's like the last couple of days, I know, because I've gotten to know myself pretty good, right? I know that the stress at work and some of the things at home have bubbled up, and I can tell because my patience is less. All these little things are red flags that I can see. See what I'm saying? So yeah, that brings us back. But I think repair is really important. I listened to a TED Talk by Dr. Becky Kennedy. We talked about her a little bit before.
Yep.
The TED Talk really did bring a good point in, and it was talking about the point that I'm getting at is never really too late to repair. Even though to me, the sooner the better, right? The moment I realize I have screwed it up, I try to re-gauge and then go back in. I really do. But she said this whole thing about imagine if parents are still living, but you haven't talked to them for a while, or some people, their parents pass away, and all of a sudden you see this letter or you get a phone call and they say, hey, I know that we did XYZ when you were growing up. I'm sorry for this. And you're like, holy crap, I don't know if that would work, but it doesn't look like it wouldn't work. Like you wouldn't want to
Right.
not hear it. You see what I'm saying? And that goes for uh any situation, really. Like whether you had parents, whether you didn't have parents, whether you had an absent parent, whether you had it doesn't matter. Like there's
Right.
certain things that I think even as a grown adult, you're like, I would like to hear this person say this to maybe repair some of our relationship.
Absolutely.
And again, as I mentioned, because I have not been journaling, maybe I haven't caught some of those things. More and more, I realize the more I journal, the more I talk to myself. The more I talk to myself, I can tell myself the things that I maybe did wrong or right, and then move those forward. And the repair is so important because for me, the reconciliation with my girls is just more important than almost anything. And I say that because I would love to say that just raising my girls right is the most important thing, and it is very important. But I say that because I'm flawed as a human, and so understanding that I'm gonna need to reconciliate every so often is important to me, to get to that right. And so repairing whatever I call it dad capital, repairing the dad capital, or at least, as I mentioned, mending that hole in that little dad capital piggy bank to where I can then start depositing more and it doesn't go anywhere. That's really important to me now as I grow as a father of these girls, as particularly my oldest, that the statistic that Trevor hit us with last time, spending 75% of my time with her already, that has just been in my brain the entire time. So it's just something that is extremely important for me. Repairing, definitely apologizing for my flaws to them, and then reconciliating with them.
Yeah. And to go back to it, like just being so purposeful, like you said, so intentional about the relationship, forgiveness, repair, reconciliation, all of it is intentional. Like you want to have this intent to say that I value this relationship with you. You're my daughter. You are valuable, and my love for you is unconditional. Now, do I agree? Am I going to agree with every decision you make in your life? No, I'm not. Am I going to be proud of every decision you make in your life? I hope to God I would be, but I know that you're probably going to make some decisions that I'm not going to be proud of. But am I going to stop loving you? Am I going to withhold that love from you? No. As your dad, I'm never going to withhold that love from you. It's unconditional, and I always want to reconcile with you. I always want you to know that there is a place for me and you to come, and that if I need forgiveness from you, I would hope you would say, yes, I forgive you, daddy. And if you need forgiveness from me, I'm going to say that I'm going to forgive you so that we can move on. And that's the kind of intentional relationship I want to have with them. And I want to model that for them as primary because they pick up on it. They're like, my oldest, she's very intuitive. She's a little empath, I think. She takes a pulse of a room a lot. And she's, Daddy, are you still mad at me? And I was like, baby, I wasn't mad at you. Like, I was irritated. That's different. Sometimes I'm mad at you, but in that moment, I wasn't mad at you. And so we talk about that. And when I say, hey, when I say I forgive you, that means I've forgiven you, and I'm not going to hold anything against you. I'm not going to hold this against you going forward in our relationship.
So how do you guys all repair with your girls? Come talk to us. Send your comments, your concerns to conversations@daughterpodcast.com. Come talk to Blandon. Come talk to myself. Give us some feedback on how you guys do this. This is obviously a harder topic to really think through, because it does take a lot of purpose, as you mentioned. Remember, this is Daughter Podcast, so we're here to build a community of strong, mindful, and present fathers. We'll see you here next time on the Daughter Podcast. This is Oscar and Blandon on the other side,
where dads come to talk, think, and thrive.